Imagine a world where money is no longer something you save, not because it is rare, but because it is worthless. Imagine waking up on a cold morning. In the corner of your room sits a thick stack of banknotes. You don't count them. You don't take them to the bank. You tear them apart and feed them into a stove, lighting them on fire to warm the room, because doing that is cheaper than buying firewood. Imagine walking into a cafe and ordering a simple cup of black coffee. The price, 5,000 marks. You sit down. You drink slowly. By the time you place the cup back on the table, the waiter returns, apologetic, and hands you a new bill. 8,000 marks. Not because you ordered more, not because the cafe is cheating you, but because in the 15 minutes it took to drink your coffee, the money lost value. Imagine a man who goes to work every morning but does not get paid monthly, not weekly. He is paid every day, then twice a day. Because if he waits until evening to spend his wages, by afternoon that money won't even buy bread. This is not dystopian fiction, not a post-apocalyptic fantasy, not a warning from science fiction. This was Germany. In 1923, in less than a decade, one of the most industrialized, educated, and powerful nations in Europe watched its currency disintegrate in real time, not through invasion, not through bombing, but through the quiet, relentless overuse of the printing press. Once, Germans traded in gold. Then they traded in paper money. And then one day, they needed wheelbarrows to carry their cash to the bakery, not because they were rich, but because money had become lighter than bread. We have all seen the photographs. Children stacking banknotes into towers in the street. Families wallpapering their homes with cash because it was cheaper than buying real wallpaper. The images are shocking, but they do not answer the most important question. Why? How does a government, one that still exists, one that still collects taxes, one that still claims authority, manage to destroy its own money? Most history books offer a clean explanation. The Treaty of Versailles, a document signed after World War I crushing reparations. A humiliating punishment imposed by the victors. And yes, that explanation contains truth. But it is only half the truth. If Versailles were the only cause, Germany would have suffered painful inflation. But it would not have descended into madness. The real story is not simply about victorious nations punishing the defeated. It is a story about a financial gamble, about a government too afraid to tax its own citizens, about an economic weapon used as an escape and then turned inward, destroying everything. This is not just a story about inflation. It is the story of the moment money died. And when money dies, the rest of society is never far behind. To understand how money died, we have to return to a time when German money was very much alive. Before the chaos, before the wheelbarrows, before numbers lost meaning. In 1914, on the eve of the First World War, Germany stood at the peak of its power. The German mark was one of the strongest currencies on earth. It was backed by gold. It was trusted, not just inside Germany, but across Europe. Germany was not a fragile nation. It was a machine. A powerhouse of steel, chemicals, and precision engineering. Its universities produced scientists, not slogans. Its factories produced engines, not illusions. To the outside world, Germany looked unstoppable. Then the war began. Wars are not won with speeches. They are won with bullets, boots, railroads, canned food, artillery shells. All of them cost money. Enormous amounts of money. Britain and France faced this reality directly. They raised taxes. Painful taxes, unpopular taxes. Citizens complained. Businesses resisted. But the math was honest. If you want to fight a total war, you must pay for it now. Germany chose a different path. The Kaiser and his government feared something more than enemy armies. They feared their own people. High taxes, they believed, would weaken morale. They might turn public opinion against the war. They might spark unrest. So instead of taxing, Germany suspended the gold standard. With one decision, money was no longer limited by gold reserves. It was limited only by political courage and printing capacity. Paper marks flooded into the economy. At the same time, the government sold war bonds to its own citizens. The message was simple, comforting, dangerous. Lend us your savings. We will win quickly. And when we win, the enemy will pay. France, Russia, others. Germany treated the war like a leveraged investment. Borrow heavily now, win fast. Force the defeated to cover the debt later. On paper, it looked brilliant. If Germany won, the printed money would be covered by conquest and reparations. The debt would vanish under victory. It was the ultimate financial gamble. But wars do not follow balance sheets. The war did not end quickly. It dragged on for 4 brutal years, and every month the printing presses kept running. Every month the debt grew larger. Quietly, relentlessly. By 1918, the German mark had already lost roughly half its value, but most people did not notice. Why would they? The government imposed strict price controls. Propaganda reassured the population. Newspapers spoke of endurance, not erosion. The numbers were rotting beneath the surface, but the illusion of stability remained intact. Money still looked like money. Shops still opened. Paychecks still arrived. The foundation was crumbling, but the house was still standing. Then Germany lost the war. And with that defeat, the gamble collapsed. There would be no victory plunder, no foreign gold flowing into Berlin, no enemy forced to pay Germany's debts. Millions of Germans realized, almost overnight, that the war bonds they held were no longer safe investments. They were promises written by a government that had just lost everything. The illusion cracked, and what came next would finish the job. Defeat in war is never the end of the story. It is the beginning of the reckoning. In 1919, the victorious powers gathered at Versailles to decide Germany's fate. France, in particular, arrived not seeking compromise, but compensation. They had lost a generation of young men. Their farmland had been turned into mud and graves. Their factories lay in ruins. They wanted Germany to pay, not partly, not slowly, but fully. The result was a number that would haunt Europe. 132 billion gold marks, not paper marks. Gold marks. It was a sum so large that even contemporary economists struggled to comprehend it. Arguably more gold than existed in circulation across much of Europe. One man understood immediately what this meant. John Maynard Keynes, a British economist present at the negotiations, warned that the reparations were unpayable. Not difficult, not painful, unpayable. He argued that forcing Germany to meet these demands would crush its economy, destabilize its society, and plant the seeds for another war. When his warnings were ignored, he resigned and walked out. The Allies did not want economic realism. They wanted justice, or revenge. So now picture Germany in the aftermath of war. Internally, the state owed enormous sums to its own citizens from the war bonds it had sold. Externally, it owed massive reparations to foreign governments. Its industrial capacity was damaged. Its workforce was exhausted. Its population was starving under the effects of a prolonged Allied blockade. This was not a nation positioned to repay debt. It was a nation barely functioning. A responsible government would have faced a brutal truth: cut spending, raise taxes, live with anger and unrest in the short term to preserve stability in the long term. But Germany no longer had a strong government. The Weimar Republic was young, fragile, and terrified. Terrified of strikes, terrified of nationalist uprisings, terrified, above all, of a communist revolution like the one that had just consumed Russia. Raising taxes or cutting wages might ignite rebellion, and rebellion, in a defeated nation filled with armed veterans, could easily turn into civil war. So the Weimar leaders convinced themselves they had no choice. In the corner of the room stood a machine that required no debate, no votes, and no public approval. The printing press. At first, the solution seemed harmless. The government printed money to pay civil servants to fund welfare, to purchase foreign currency needed to make reparation payments. The economy appeared to recover. Exports became cheaper. Factories restarted. Unemployment fell. For a brief moment, inflation felt like relief. But inflation is a drug. The first dose feels good. The second feels necessary. The third becomes unavoidable. By 1922, prices were no longer creeping upward. They were accelerating. The wealthy noticed first. They moved their savings into foreign currencies and real assets. The poor noticed next as wages failed to keep up. The system was weakening, but it had not yet broken. That would require one final shock. By early 1923, Germany was already exhausted. Its currency was weak. Its politics were fragile. Its people were living on borrowed time and borrowed money. Then Germany missed a reparation payment. It was not an act of defiance. It was arithmetic. There simply was not enough foreign currency left to pay. For France and Belgium, patience was gone. In January 1923, their troops marched into the Ruhr Valley, Germany's industrial heartland, the region that produced coal, steel, and the raw materials that powered the entire economy. The plan was blunt and practical. If Germany could not pay in money, it would pay in goods. Coal would be taken directly from the mines, steel from the mills. Value would be extracted at the source. Germany could not respond militarily. Its army had been dismantled under the terms of the peace treaty, so the government in Berlin chose another strategy: passive resistance. German workers in the Ruhr were ordered not to cooperate. Do not mine the coal. Do not run the machines. Do not work for the occupiers. Go on strike. And the government made them a promise: we will still pay your wages. Pause for a moment and consider the economics of that decision. The state deliberately shut down its most productive region. It destroyed its own supply of coal and steel. And at the same time, it continued to inject money into the economy to pay workers who were producing nothing. Money poured in. Goods disappeared. Supply collapsed toward zero. Demand, fueled by freshly printed paper, moved toward infinity. This is not ideology. This is not politics. This is the textbook definition of hyperinflation. The printing presses began to run day and night. Thousands of workers were hired just to print money. So much currency was needed that Germany began to run out of paper. And this is where the system crossed a line. By the summer of 1923, prices were no longer rising. They were exploding. In 1914, $1 had been worth 4 marks. By July 1923, it was worth 353,000 marks. In August, 4 million. In September, 100 million. By November, $1 was worth 4.2 trillion marks. At that point, the numbers stopped being useful. They stopped being information. They became noise. Money had not just weakened, it had lost meaning. And when money loses meaning, society soon follows. Once the currency collapsed, everyday life became a race. Not toward comfort, not toward prosperity, but toward the next purchase before prices changed again. Workers ran from factories to bakeries the moment they were paid. Not at the end of the day, immediately, because bread that cost one amount in the morning would cost twice as much by evening. Restaurants stopped printing menus. Waiters stood on chairs and shouted new prices every half hour. A tram ticket could cost millions at breakfast and billions by nightfall. There is a story from this time, repeated so often because it captures the madness perfectly. A man pushed a wheelbarrow filled with banknotes to a bakery 2 by 2 loaves of bread. He stepped inside to check the line. When he came back out, the wheelbarrow was gone. The money was still there. Thieves had dumped the cash on the street and stolen the wheelbarrow instead. The wheelbarrow had value. The money did not. The middle class was destroyed. People who had done everything right, teachers, doctors, civil servants, watched their lifetime savings evaporate. Money that once could have bought a house could no longer buy a newspaper. Debtors, however, became kings. If you owed 50,000 marks on a home, you could sell a single egg, receive 50,000 marks, and pay off your mortgage with the proceeds of one chicken. The greatest winner was an industrialist named Hugo Stinnes. He borrowed enormous sums of rapidly depreciating marks. With that debt, he bought factories, mines, ships, and newspapers. Later, he repaid his loans with currency that had become almost worthless. At the height of the crisis, he controlled roughly 1/6 of German industry. For everyone else, survival replaced ambition. Farmers refused to sell food for paper money. Why would they? By the time they reached the bank, the money would already be worth less. City dwellers began to travel to the countryside on so-called hamster trips. They carried whatever they still owned: wedding rings, pianos, family heirlooms, winter coats. They traded them for potatoes, for pork, for a few days of food. Doctors began reporting a strange new illness. They called it zero stroke. People were forced to calculate numbers with 10, 12, 15 zeros every day. The mental strain caused dizziness, confusion, and paralysis. The human mind was not built to live inside numbers that large. Crime surged. Prostitution spread, not from choice, but from hunger. The social fabric unraveled. When money, the thing that measures the value of your labor, becomes meaningless, labor itself begins to feel meaningless. Trust collapses. Rules feel optional. The future disappears. And in that vacuum, something dangerous moves in. Economic collapse does not remain confined to markets. It moves outward into psychology, into politics, into the streets. By late 1923, Germany was no longer just poor. It was furious. People had not simply lost money. They had lost faith. Faith in savings, faith in contracts. Faith in the idea that playing by the rules would protect them. The middle class, in particular, felt betrayed. They had worked. They had saved. They had trusted the state. And the state had destroyed them. In moments like this, moderation becomes invisible. Patience feels like weakness. Democracy feels slow, fragile, and dishonest. People do not ask for careful explanations. They ask for someone to blame. It is no coincidence that in this exact moment, November 1923, a previously obscure political agitator believed the time had come. His name was Adolf Hitler. In Munich, with the economy in ruins and authority weakened, Hitler attempted to seize power in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch. He climbed onto a table, fired a pistol into the ceiling, declared a national revolution. The coup failed. Police opened fire. Several people were killed. Hitler was arrested. In prison, he would begin writing Mein Kampf. At the time, he seemed like a footnote, a failed extremist. But the lesson is not about Hitler himself. It is about the conditions that made his attempt possible. Hyperinflation does not just erase bank accounts. It erodes legitimacy. It radicalizes ordinary people, shopkeepers, clerks, veterans who feel they have nothing left to lose. When the system collapses, people do not search for balance. They search for certainty, even if it comes wrapped in danger. But while politics was spiraling, someone in Berlin finally understood that the bleeding had to stop. Money could not be saved by printing more of it. The presses had to be turned off. By the autumn of 1923, Germany had reached the end of the road. The currency was dead. The economy was frozen. The population was exhausted. There was no clever trick left. No gradual fix. No painless option. only a hard stop. The government appointed a new currency commissioner, Jalmar Schacht. He was not chosen because he was kind. He was chosen because he was decisive. Schacht understood something that many politicians refuse to accept. Money is not sustained by paper. It is sustained by belief. And belief cannot survive unlimited printing. On November 15, 1923, Schacht introduced a new currency, the Rentenmark. Germany had no gold left, so this new money could not be backed by metal. Instead, Schacht offered something different. He declared that the Rentenmark was backed by German land and industrial assets, farms, factories, railroads. In effect, he mortgaged the entire country. It was a psychological maneuver more than a financial one, but it sounded solid. He fixed the exchange rate. 1 Rentenmark for 1 trillion old paper marks. Wheelbarrows full of currency were dragged to banks. Trillions were exchanged for a handful of new notes. But the real change was not the exchange rate. It was discipline. Schacht shut down the printing presses. He told the government plainly, if you run out of money, you do not print more. You cut spending or you raise taxes. There would be no exceptions. The shock was brutal. Bankruptcies surged. Unemployment rose. Companies failed. The drug of easy money was gone, but the fever broke. Prices stopped rising. Then they stabilized. For the first time in years, a worker knew that money earned on Monday would still be worth something on Friday. The miracle worked. Germany entered what would later be called the Golden Twenties. The economy recovered. Streets filled again. Businesses reopened. But recovery does not erase memory. And the memory of 1923 would never fade. Germany survived the hyperinflation of 1923. The currency stabilized. Shops reopened. Life on the surface returned to something resembling normal. But beneath that surface, something had been permanently damaged. The middle class had been erased. Not slowly, not gently, but completely. These were people who had done everything the system asked of them. They worked. They saved. They trusted contracts, pensions, and institutions, and they were punished for it. Meanwhile, speculators and debtors, those who borrowed heavily and moved quickly, emerged wealthy. Some fabulously so. The lesson people absorbed was not economic, it was moral. The system is not fair. Rules protect no one. Trust is dangerous. That belief did not disappear when the Rentenmark succeeded. It hardened. When the next crisis arrived, the Great Depression in 1929, the wounds reopened instantly. Those who had lost everything once were unwilling to endure it again. They no longer believed democratic governments could protect them. They remembered the wheelbarrows. They remembered the hunger. They remembered how quickly order vanished. So when radical solutions appeared, they did not seem radical. They seemed necessary. The story of German hyperinflation is often told as a story about numbers, about trillions, about exchange rates and banknotes. But that is the wrong lens. This is a story about trust. Money is not metal. It is not paper. 'Tis a shared illusion, a collective agreement between a government and its people. As long as that agreement holds, money works. The moment it is abused, the illusion collapses. And when money dies, civilization itself is never far behind. That is the real lesson of 1923, not just for Germany. It's for anyone who believes that reality can be printed away.